Hello, fellow horror fiends, and welcome to The Horror Within Me, a podcast dedicated to the world of horror. Join us each week as our host explores a new, horrifying topic from the many realms of horror, such as film, television, and more, and returns to tell us his terrifying revelations. So sit back, relax, and get ready to face the horrors within.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another Horror Within Me episode. I am your host, Eric. It's time to spend yet another spooky Sunday together. Last weekend was Halloween weekend, and it was so much fun. My episode was a Halloween special where I rated all 13 films in the Halloween film franchise. Had a lot of fun doing it, being my favorite for a horror franchise. I thought it was great. But I'm really actually more excited now that spooky season is over, because the whole fun, the whole allure of spooky season is a lot of people are into it just for the time being, from like September and October when things are scary. But now more people are back in there. I see all the TikToks and the memes of Mariah Carey's Christmas and all the fun stuff, which, don't get me wrong, as a horror fan, that does not mean that that's all I care about. I also love the fun holidays. I decorated my house for Thanksgiving. It's all the fun, cozy fall stuff. I love Christmas as well. I love other kinds of films aside from horror. I love comedy. I like rom-coms. Don't judge me on that. But there's still that space for horror in my life, and there always will be. And I was trying to think of how do I want to start this month of November after we were so strong in October with the Night of the Demons, and we did a lot of stuff and coming off of the school specials, which were fun to do. What do I really want to do? What do I want to talk about right this month? And the first thing that I thought about, I don't know why, I think of Thanksgiving, I think of families, I think of people coming home, families together. And the first thing, I don't know why, that popped in my head was The Strangers. The 2008 film is something I wanted to touch upon. Not just the film, but kind of the universe. And, recently there was news that broke in September that we're going to be getting a brand new trilogy that I'm going to talk about and give you some information that I found in a new article. But The Strangers is... Let's just talk about it real quick. It was released in 2008. The rating on IMDb is a 6.1 out of 10 and a 48% on Rotten Tomatoes. If you guys don't know anything about it, it stars Liv Tyler as Kristen and Scott Speedman as James, and the synopsis is a young couple staying in an isolated vacation home are terrorized by 3 unknown assailants, and it was written and directed by Brian Bertino. Okay. I remember when The Strangers was released, and it's still a movie that terrifies me to this day, which is why it made this show, right? This show is all about trauma and horror and the mix of it all. And if you are a listener, you can kind of catch when I talk about my trauma, even if it's indirect. Sometimes I'm very direct on things, sometimes I'm not. But those of you who have trauma like me, which is probably why you're listening to this show, because you can relate to the content that I choose to talk about and how I choose to talk about it, will catch up on that and have relations with that on how you relate to it. If that came out weird. But yeah, so The Strangers is a fun movie for me because it's one of the few movies that is in my mind for horror. Spoiler alerts, is an unhappy ending, and it's a realistic ending, and to the point where it's inspired by true events. So what that means is there are two events that this movie is inspired by: the true event of the Manson family Tate murders and a series of break-ins that occurred from the director Brian Bertino's neighborhood when he was a kid. Those are the two events, if you were curious, on what The Strangers was based off of. Now, I don't know if there's a person in this world who don't know who the Manson family was, but the Manson family was a cult family, like a cult, led by Charles Manson, and it was in the late 1960s, early 70s kind of things. One of the things that, there's gained popularity from the Manson family are the Sharon Tate murder and the murder of her friends. So the Sharon Tate was 8.5 months pregnant. She was an actress, and they were four Manson members of the Manson family that broke into her house and killed them. That I just always felt terrible for all of the victims, obviously, but I mean, to think about this woman who's 8.5 months pregnant being murdered, and her kid. I've read that she was stabbed to death like they stabbed her in the stomach multiple times first to kill the kid. I don't know. I could be wrong. I don't remember that, and I didn't look too much into it, but I remember. So the reason, like, for me to relate to the strangers is it's not really a relate, but there is a fear, right, of your home is your security, your safety. It's where you can go and be 100% yourself, no matter what, whether you live alone or if you live with someone. Hopefully the person or people that you live with are some people that you feel comfortable enough to be yourself, because your home should be your safe space, your fortress. These are the walls that protect you from the outside world, and you can go and shut off everything, right? So I remember one time when I was a kid, so I grew up in the ghetto, right? So I wasn't in rural areas or anything like that. I was in the urban areas. And in a lot of the areas like that, there are drug addicts. So I remember, and I have to tell this story. When I was a teenager, a drug addict broke into our house, and and we were home, but it was later at night. But me and my sister Heather were in my bedroom. So when you walk up my steps at my house that I grew up in, at the top, you can go to the right, and there was just like the bathroom and my bedroom, and to the left were like my sister's room, the attic, and the parents' bedroom. I'm guessing the woman came towards my room, and my dog, his name was Shadow. He was a black and white pit bull who was like my mom's new baby, was laying in the room with her down the hall, must have heard her and jumped off and started and chased her out of the house, right? My sister opened the door and seen her run at just a moment. So I didn't actually see her, but the thought of someone being in our home and not knowing that, to the point where she made it up the stairs. Obviously, I don't think she had harmful intents. I think it was, she was just looking for money or jewelry or something she could sell to get her next fix. And I remember, I think my sister said that her boyfriend at the time was on his way home from work. He was walking and saw the lady running down the street. When we had gone downstairs, we noticed that at the bottom of the steps, there was like a recliner, and there were, all our coats were on there, and things were, and the contents were pulled out. Like, so she was in the house for a minute searching, and that's so uneasy to me. It just really makes me feel so uncomfortable. And I don't know if any of you have similar stories or can relate or have worse stories, maybe an actual, traumatic break-in or home invasion. I hope not, but this is the reality we live in. These things happen, and I can't imagine that. It's one of my fears because of that. And here's a little fun fact that there is a name for this kind of, it's sclerophobia, I believe, and it's the irrational fear of bad men or burglars. So that's kind of interesting. So I think movies like The Strangers bring out those fears in us, and for some of us invoke that phobia, because it's almost unimaginable to think of being alone in your home. And there's a lot of home invasion movies. We have like Hush with Kate Siegel, where she plays the deaf woman and the man coming into her house. There's You're Next. Even the original first Purge, when they were getting in the house. There's so many movies about home invasion that are well done and terrifying. So I just want to think about, like, for a second, how do we protect ourselves from these situations. Of course, you get security cameras, you get alarm systems. Some people feel safe with firearms. I don't have any of that. And I shouldn't say out loud. I shouldn't say I don't have any of that because I do have some, but I don't have firearms. I don't have firearms in my home, but I have a bat. And then people used to laugh, and I used to keep it in my old apartment next to the door. And I believe it was my husband who pointed out to me before we were married or living together. And he's like, what is the point of your bat being next to the door if somebody's breaking in? And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Because if they got in, I have to get to the door to get the bat. But in my mind, I think I was thinking of getting to the door before they got in to be able to get the bat. Needless to say, the bat is next to my bed now because it really didn't make any sense on why I had it anywhere else, especially next to the door. You know what? Hey, if you're coming in, here's a bat just in case somebody's home. I'm that kind of host. No, fuck that. So I removed that away from there. But before I move on to the next part of this show, I didn't want to forget for terrifying trivia. There's still terrifying trivia, and it's related to The Strangers 2008 film. And so it is time for terrifying trivia. This week's terrifying trivia question is, when the doll-faced stranger knocks on the door, what is the name of the person she is looking for? Stick around to the end of this episode to get the answer. So, I call her the doll-faced stranger because she's the one with I don't know. There was like two, right? But I think it was the blonde one that knocked on the door first, which is just, I joke and say this all the time to my sister, but I'm not going to say it now because it's going to give away the answer. But it's just, we have a sick sense of humor. I joke about the fucking weirdest shit with her. We laugh about too many things. My one sister does, my one sister doesn't. But my oldest sister, she made a joke recently about a traumatic event that happened to me as a child from my mom. I don't know if I told this story on here yet, but when I was 16, my mom was really drunk one night as usual, and a fight had begun. And my one sister, Heather, was downstairs, and they were arguing, and my nephew's high chair was on the table. It was like not a high chair, but it was like a booster seat. It was like those old booster seats that were red and blue. And my mom was a thrower. She really didn't hit a lot, but she threw a lot of stuff when she especially was really angry and really drunk. So she went to throw. So I got down there at some point. She went to throw the plastic high chair at my sister. And I grabbed it and I said, stop. I'm just trying to be peacemaker and trying to get everyone to just shut the fuck up. And then I turned around to leave the kitchen, and she picked up I call it a Jesus candle. I don't know if anyone else knows what I mean by that, but it's like those tall candles that you can get at the dollar store that have like Jesus or Mary or whatever Catholic person, religious person on it. I don't know why we fucking had this in the house. I just don't. But she picked it up and threw that instead. And I don't remember feeling pain or anything, but I blacked out for a second and must have fallen to the ground because I woke up and I don't think it was a long second, but I blinked. There was blackness, and I was on my hands and knees, and I looked. I'm like, what the fuck? And I touched the back of my head, and when I looked at my hand, it was full of blood, right? So she had busted the back of my head open, and I, went to the ER, and I lied and told them that I fell down the stairs and hit the post. But anyway, I got 7 staples put in the back of my head. So my sister sent me a meme that said something with the back of someone's head, like completely busted open, like a piece of ceramic that you break or something. It was like, when your mom tells you something, she said, but it was like a reference to that. And I was so proud of her for in that moment to be able to make a joke about stuff, because she's one that usually doesn't. And it's not fun, but I mean, we all have our traumas and how we handle them. And I will never apologize or be apologetic for making my trauma and making dark humor or sarcasm out of that, because that is my coping mechanism. Whether you agree with it or not, that's fine. I'm never going to change the way that I choose to deal with what I have, dealt with in my life. But yeah, I digress. So The Strangers. We've got a sequel 10 years later, which was The Strangers Pray at Night, and that was, in 2018. And it was a different, it was the same three murderers, but it was a family, and it was completely different than the original or the first one. And I enjoyed both of them for what they were. But I think what got me the most for the 2008 movie The Strangers was that final scene. This is a big spoiler alert. Okay. So if you haven't seen The Strangers, and you should skip over this part. Just fast forward a little bit. There's the final scene when Kristen asks, Kristen and her husband or fiance are, at this point, the strangers are in there. They caught them and they tied them to chairs and bound them or whatever. She looks at the three of them standing in front of them and asks, "Why are you doing this?" To which the one replies, "Because you were home." And my heart sinks, even knowing now, just every time. It gets me every time because it is so terrifying, because you're like, okay, well, there has to be some reason. We watch horror movies, and movies, there was always some driving force right behind the antagonist. Michael Myers, and most of his timelines was pursuing his family. He had, a reason to kill. Jason Voorhees killed anyone that came to the camp because he was out for revenge for the death of his mother. Freddy Krueger stalked people in their dreams because he was burned to death by the parents of the kids that he was going after now. They always give you some explanation. And for this, it was just because you were home. They were just out looking to terrorize and murder anyone whose light was on at that night. Like, you were just like a lottery. You were like 2 out of whatever amount in that area. Like, it was just a very unlucky coincidence for this couple. That is extremely terrifying to me. There's just a sense of darkness in these three to think that the only reason that these two were targeted was because their light was on, and they decided, let's knock on the door, and if they answer, we have our target for the night. If they never answered the door, they would have went on to someone else. And the realization on their faces is just horrifying. You know what I mean? But even at this point, you have a little bit of hope for the couple, right? But then it gets worse, right? It gets even worse, because then the one stranger girl with the dark hair mask goes out, comes back with a big butcher knife, puts it on the ground, and then the blonde one takes off her mask. Then the other girl takes off her mask, and then the man takes off his mask. And at this point, you're realizing in their own sick way, they're showing the couple who they are, just because they know that they're never going to be able to tell anyone. They kept masks on the whole time in case shit went south and they had to get out of there and the couple survived. They wouldn't be able to be identified. They're so confident in this point that this couple's about to die that they let them see who they are. And at that point, you just knew that the fate of this couple was already sealed with the first knock at that door. They always planned on murdering them, and that it was never, because they opened that door, that this was going to happen. And it's such a disturbing scene, and it's so powerful because they each take turns stabbing the couple and killing them. And it's heartbreaking because you never see that much done in horror movies. There's always good prevails over evil, and there's always like final girls or final boys or whatever the case is, and you root for the good guys, and the bad guys get what's coming to them, and it's half the fun is to watch the bad guys, kill all these people, but then it's even more fun to watch them get what's coming to them and it be done to them. And in this movie, that doesn't happen. They murder this couple and then they leave. And it's so dreadful and so realistic. We watch true crime, right? I watch a lot of true crime, and you hear about these things that happen like that in real life. And I don't know, and I'm a dark person. I look into my brain all the time, and I always have these scenarios. You know what I mean? Growing up in chaos, as I say every week, is, you are in survival mode a lot, and you watch these movies that are so dark and traumatic to people because you think so much has happened to me. It wouldn't be unheard of for me to be in one of these situations. So what can I learn, right? What can I learn about this? Don't open the fucking door. I don't know. This one, there's not a lot to learn about. It just was unfortunate. Somebody knocked at the door. You don't think nothing of it. You open the door, or you say, "Who is it?" or something like. Your first instinct when somebody knocks at your door usually isn't, shh, they're murderers, don't answer the door. That's usually not a person's first instinct. We try to give people the benefit of the doubt. Most of us. I don't know about me. I try to hold on to some light and some hope and some optimism. I think I'm a very optimistic person, but I'm also a very dark-minded person. And I don't blame the horror movies. I obviously, like I said, I blame the real fucking world, whether it was my trauma or hearing about trauma from other people and the news and all of the true stories. It's a dark place. But anyway, that last scene, fucking terrifying, which brings me on to, like I said, recently in September, we heard that there's going to be a new trilogy of The Strangers coming out. I'm excited and apprehensive at the same time because the first Strangers is so iconic. I hope that this new one doesn't aren't coming out for a grab at, a Hollywood grab, right? Oh, wait. We got to back up just a little bit. I have to rate the Strangers movie before we talk about the new ones. My rating for The Strangers 2008 is we're going to do doll masks because I thought they were fun. And I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I am not going to explain why. I'm just going to give it an 8 out of 10. I thought it was fun. I thought it's terrifying. It was original and it was new. But obviously there are elements that were not great. But 8 out of 10 for me. I definitely don't think 48% on Rotten Tomatoes is fair. But let's move back to where we're getting ready into the new trilogy. So I found a new article from like a day ago on this website /film. And it gave us really fun details about this new film that's out, right? The new first entry of the trilogy. So it's going to be directed by Rennie Harlin. And the synopsis that I found on a couple sites, I think I found it on Fangoria and this /film site. And it basically boils down to something like this. So it's about a couple driving across the country to start their new life. And they are forced to stay at an Airbnb after their car breaks down in Venus, Oregon. Unfortunately, they're in for a pretty bad stay when 3 masked strangers start to toy with them. So, a little bit different. The Airbnb thing, immediately I think of Barbarian, which I did just watch on Halloween with my husband and Jenny. And only thing I knew about Barbarian, that's going to jump into it really quickly, is that I thought it was about a girl who went to an Airbnb and it was double booked, and that was what, the premise of the movie was going to be. It is fucking not that at all. There's like very little to do with that, if anything at all. But also a good movie. It's on HBO Max, so go check it out. But anyway, the lead couple that are going to be in the new Strangers is Madeline Petch, who is in Riverdale, and Foy Gutierrez, who was in Hocus Pocus 2. And apparently, filming on the first film just wrapped, and the movie is expected to hit theaters sometime in 2023. I like Madeline. I watched Riverdale for a few seasons, and I am drawing a blank as to her character's name, but she's the redhead who's rich. She lives, oh God, I will not think of her name. I will think of her name probably after the fact, but I liked it. I like her. I think she's a good actress, and I'm excited to see her in this. I cannot think of who the boy for is. Hocus Pocus 2, I just watched one time, but I didn't look up who he was in it. So if any of you know, let me know, or I'll look it up after this. So I'm excited to see how they're going to do this trilogy. I'm guessing that obviously it's going to be based on the 3 strangers throughout each of the 3 films, and most likely our couple in the first one will probably come to an unfortunate demise. That's my prediction. I don't see them surviving. I see maybe it going, they'll have a heavy presence throughout the following 2 films as a driving story. I've read somewhere that someone else is going to be playing the sister of the wife or the couple. So of the woman, Madeline. And I wonder if it's going to be, that sister's going to be the main protagonist in the following films. Who knows? But I feel like their murder sets off the plot line for the entire trilogy. That's my guess. Like I said, I only know a little bit about this. I've read this article on Slash Film and a little bit on it on Fangoria, which Fangoria is amazing people. It's just, I recently signed up. I think I talked to my niece or nephew, and I'm like, do you know what Fangoria? My niece, who's my horror girl. She's like, no. I was like, well, fucking look it up. It's like the world's most famous horror magazine ever. And it went away for a while, and it was recently released. Like, not recently, but it came back. Anyway, that is this week's episode based on The Strangers. Next week, we will be talking about, I'm so excited. We're going to be talking about witches in folk history, in movies, in representation. And the best person that I have in my life who can bring a different perspective of witches aside from film is Grace. So Grace is to be joining me next week to talk about witches. And we're going to talk about some witch films. We're going to talk about all that fun stuff. But before we leave, I have to give you the answer to this week's terrifying trivia question. So the answer to this week's terrifying trivia question, which I'm going to repeat one more time. When the doll-faced stranger knocks on the door, what is the name of the person she is looking for? And the answer is Tamara. If you remember, she knocks on the door and they say, like, oh, who is it? And she says, is Tamara home? And they're like, no. And then she asks again later on. It was just really fucking weird. So yeah, this week's answer was, the answer is Tamara. But that is it for this week's episode. Make sure you lock your doors, set your alarms, and keep your baseball bat next to your bed. And when you're not listening to the brand new episode of The Horror Within Me, you can get more Horror Within Me content on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and new videos on other topics on YouTube at The Horror Within Me. Look me up, like, rate, subscribe. And if you have an idea for an upcoming episode, or if you are also as an enthusiastic horror fan as I am and would like to be a guest on my show, go to thehorrorwithinme.com, click on contact, and send me an email, and let's work it out. So that is it. As always, stay safe, but more importantly, stay spooky.